So I am finally starting my series of reviews on Netflix's Atypical. I did script this one. Hopefully I can keep to my script. Hopefully I made myself very clear with the things I scripted. I'm feeling very frustrated right now. Hopefully nothing comes across badly because I wrote while frustrated. I am still frustrated. So frustrated. I got nearly 2,000 words here. There is a lot. I am sorry if things don't come across in the most clear manner, but I tried. So I first watched Atypical on Netflix about 2 years ago when it first came out. At the time, I'd only been diagnosed with autism about 3 months earlier, and I was still learning exactly what that meant for me, and I remember watching the show and just feeling so excited that there was this character who was like me with so many of the same personality traits and thoughts and feelings that I had, and I think it is more than safe to say that I was blinded by my excitement at finally seeing myself explicitly represented in a character, and that I did not watch the show with a critical eye at all at the time. Not feeling so well represented anymore, I can tell you that much. A lot has changed since that initial viewing. I am more educated. I have immersed myself more in the online autistic community, and I am continuing to learn more every day. I have taken both script writing and theater criticism courses and have consumed hours and hours and hours of content from Lindsay Ellis, Folding Ideas, and other similarly wonderful YouTube critics. My critical eye has sharpened significantly, I believe, and just a couple hours ago I rewatched the first episode of Atypical for the first time since 2017, and it was an experience. So my original thought was that I would just do a review on each individual episode. I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to stick with that format at this point. But the first episode is the only one I will really be discussing in depth, as it is the only one I have rewatched at this point. But this is also going to be a discussion on some writing and storytelling stuff, particularly framing, because that is a major contributing factor to why I feel the way I do about the show. I'm also going to kind of discuss Community, another sitcom, a bit as well for purposes of comparison. So, the episode starts with a brief voiceover monologue from Sam, the main character, who is autistic. And it's kind of great because everything he's saying is stuff that I get. It's the same kind of thoughts and feelings I've had about things, and then it cuts, and we find out that he's in an appointment with his therapist. The monologue was an answer to a question she had asked. We don't know what the question was. It's never mentioned. Not important. Dog is barking. I'm just gonna ignore that. Anyways, so his therapist replies to his response to the question, and then Sam just goes and says, for no reason at all, "I can see your bra. It's purple." And that is basically the pattern for almost the entire episode, and this is where I already feel the need to stop and go off on a tangent about the importance of framing and storytelling. It is not enough to just have plot elements and characters in a story. Those are important. But what is equally important is the manner in which you frame those elements. For example, whose story is it? In Disney's animated Sleeping Beauty, it is framed partially as Aurora's story, though she's hardly an active agent. It's also largely Prince Philip's story of how he rescues her. And Maleficent is clearly the villain. Whereas in Disney's live-action movie Maleficent, it is Maleficent's story, and she is the protagonist, while Aurora's father is the villain. The two movies share the same basic premise, characters, plot elements. They tell the same general, very basic fairy tale, but they are framed very, very differently and end up telling two very different stories as a result. One is framed through the lens of Maleficent being the antagonist and unquestionably a villain, arguably one of the best Disney villains of all time, and the other frames her as the protagonist. Not sure I'd go so far as to call her the hero, maybe anti-hero, but definitely the protagonist. So, Atypical is a sitcom about a family where the son is autistic, and the way in which it is all framed, it really feels like Sam, the autistic one, is the punchline. We are very clearly not meant to be laughing with him. The way the show frames his autistic traits at many points makes them come across as cringy, things to ridicule. I'm autistic and share many of his traits, and even I was cringing. With comedy, framing would largely be how, who are you laughing at or who are you laughing with? And the framing here is we are meant to laugh at Sam, not with him. He's not laughing at anything. That said, it is absolutely possible to make a sitcom with an autistic character and have it work well and provide meaningful representation. For example, Community is one of my favorite shows of all time, and Abed Nadir is one of my favorite characters of all time. Abed is never explicitly confirmed to be autistic, though he displays many traits, and the show does hint towards that in text, with Jeff telling him he has Asperger's in the first episode, and Abed's own line on the spectrum, it's none of your business, in a later episode. However, when any of this is played for humor, we are very clearly laughing with Abed, not at him. And there are times many times in the show, where we are very clearly and strongly meant to sympathize with him. His friends are accepting of who he is and never try to fix Abed. Instead, they work with him and support him. Abed's traits are not a punchline, unlike Sam in Atypical. He's just another great character in a great show, and his traits play off of those of the other characters in a really, really great and comedic manner. And it works. So back to Atypical. There is very, very much a framing problem here, and possibly also a bit of a tone problem. I'm not sure what exactly it is that the show wants me to feel. All I know is I came out confused and frustrated after one episode. I went on a roller coaster of many elements crammed in together. The information being dropped through Sam's internal monologues was great for the most part. His stuff with penguins and Antarctica reminded me a lot of how I go on about my own special interests. I like that they included stimming and echolalia. I like Sam's sister, Casey. Her relationship with Sam reminds me of my own relationship with my sister. I also like Sam's relationship with his friend from work. But then the show goes and crashes by, well, one example of how the show crashes is they have a girl that Sam goes on a date with, call him the R word, without even bothering to get into that. It just assumes that everyone should know that's not a word that should ever be used and is deeply offensive, but people still use it all the time like it's a synonym for stupid. And I know it's not Netflix's job to educate people, but in a show about an autistic character where you're going to use that word, I feel like you should stop and analyze that a bit. This show uses Sam's inner monologue for exposition, and I am not complaining at all about the exposition. Like, maybe in other shows or movies, yeah, the exposition's a problem, but when it comes to autism, we're dealing with completely different neurotypes. So information can't always be conveyed clearly through showing rather than telling. Telling works really well here. They did have his inner monologue going a bit, but it was more about him being disappointed that the date didn't go well rather than his reaction being called a horrible slur. And I haven't even gotten to the autism mom stuff yet. That is a thing. It's not such a big thing in the first episode, really, but yeah, that's there. Very overprotective autism mom who straight up thinks her 18-year-old son can't date and very clearly doesn't want him dating, which really, her behavior and the way that she talks about him all the time throughout the show just leaves me questioning, how does he even have a job if that's the case? She goes on in one scene about how so many things are going to be impossible for him. He'll never be able to live independently at all in any way, shape, or form. She She says she's afraid he'll try to cross the street with his eyes closed, yet he has a job and he takes the bus to and from places by himself with no problems. She describes her level of concern over Sam's safety in a way that has me surprised that she isn't constantly hovering over his shoulder every second of every day. And it is so confusing because it just doesn't match up at all with what we're shown. Yes, autism is a spectrum. Everyone is different. Just because someone can have a job doesn't mean 100% that they are capable of living entirely independently. But the way that she talks about him makes it sound like he's completely incapable of even the least bit of independence. Which, to the point was where I was starting to feel offended because I share very many of his traits in very similar ways. I've got a job, I have a boyfriend, and have lived independently for periods of time during university, but many of his traits are very much the same as my own traits. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing if someone isn't capable of living independently. There's no shame in that, but the way that she's talking about it, with Sam's case, knowing how similar it is to my own case, when I am capable of these things, it's like, it makes me feel like I'm supposed to be entirely incapable of things, and I don't like that. Like, for example, one of the things she says is like, Sam is so bad at nonverbal communication, and romantic relationships require so much more of that than normal ones. It's like, I'm equally terrible at picking up social cues and other nonverbal communication things that neurotypicals use, and I'm still managing a romantic relationship just fine, thank you. Like, thank God my own mother isn't like that. It would drive me crazy if she was. Oh, and then there was that ending bit that made it sound almost like a horror movie was about to start. Just taking the penguin thing and making it super creepy with Sam's crush on his therapist, which, yeah, that's also a thing. There's another critique on the way that this show handles framing. I think first Sam's quirks are a punchline, and then it makes him seem like a major creepy stalker with penguins mate for life as he's looking at his therapist, and we are very clearly supposed to be getting the hint that he has a crush on her. Like, having him have a crush on his therapist is fine. Like, that can be a plot element. But the way they handled it, like, did they have to handle it that way? It just sounds so creepy. Like, yes, the penguin comparisons do make sense because of the special interest stuff. I relate everything back to my special interests all the time, but those lines were just a little too far for my tastes. Again, it's all the way it's framed. Like, there is a way of doing that well, but the framing makes him seem like he's the worst. They go from having him be relatable for me to having him be the worst so quickly. Just flip-flops. Overall, I just feel frustrated with the show so far. There are moments where it comes so close, but then it goes and crashes, and I was just left feeling very, very uncomfortable at various moments and angry at others. And overall, I'm just confused and frustrated. There were moments where it genuinely felt like they were really, really trying, and certain things like the information they included make me think that maybe there could have been a slight chance for it, but it felt like a mess. Are we laughing at Sam, sympathizing with Sam, or are we supposed to think he's a creepy stalker? I don't know. All three came through to me at the end of the episode. Or maybe we're just supposed to pity his family for being stuck with him. Bits of that came through well at times, and it's a mess. It's a mess, and I am frustrated and confused. Oh yeah, and they couldn't even be bothered to cast an autistic actor as Sam. They got a neurotypical to play him. Big shocker. So I guess what we're actually supposed to take away from all of this is that Autism only matters when neurotypicals can profit by exploiting us for comedy purposes, so never mind about the confusion. I guess I'm just frustrated. That's it.